Good afternoon to all the teachers joining us from Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. On behalf of the Pacific Alliance and the British Council, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. From Planning to Assessment, Effective English Language Teaching. My name is Alejandra Alfaro, and before we begin, let me remind you that this webinar will be conducted in English. You are welcome to watch the recording at the same link and activate the Spanish subtitles or auto dubbing. It is important to remember that everyone is welcome to post their comments and questions in the chat, while ensuring that communication remains respectful and positive. Remember, our goal is to enrich your teaching practice and provide you with tools to improve education in our country. Please note that harmful, violent, inappropriate, or non-academic comments will not be accepted. Let's work together to always maintain a respectful 100% academic environment. This webinar will be available on demand for 1 week, which you will visit with the same link. To obtain the proof of attendance, please register your participation in the survey we will share at the end of the session. This survey will also be available for 1 week. Now, I'd like to welcome BA Mariana Solis Aguilera, leader of REAP in 2026, who will open our webinar with a welcome message.
Muy buenas tardes a todas y todos. A nombre de los puntos focales de Chile, Colombia, Perú y México, que conforman la red de inglés de la Alianza del Pacífico, les damos la más cordial bienvenida al webinar internacional From Planning to Assessment, Effective English Language Teaching. Es un gusto contar con la participación de todas y todos ustedes. Antes de comenzar con este webinar, es importante compartir con ustedes que la Alianza del Pacífico, integrada por Chile, Colombia, Perú y México desde 2011, surge como una iniciativa de integración regional orientada a fortalecer el crecimiento económico, el bienestar social y la competitividad de los países miembros. En este marco y con el objetivo de contribuir a la superación de la desigualdad económica mediante el fortalecimiento de la educación, en 2014 se creó el Grupo Técnico de Educación, desde el cual se impulsó la cooperación para fortalecer la enseñanza y el aprendizaje del idioma inglés en los 4 países. Como resultado de este trabajo conjunto, en 2020 se oficializó la Red de Inglés de la Alianza del Pacífico, enfocada en promover acciones de cooperación regional a través de pilares estratégicos como la capacitación docente, la creación de redes profesionales, la investigación y la colaboración internacional. En este sentido, el webinar que hoy nos reúne busca fortalecer la práctica docente cotidiana a través de 2 sesiones enfocadas en procesos fundamentales para la enseñanza del idioma inglés, la planeación y la evaluación para el aprendizaje, y forma parte de las acciones impulsadas en el marco del proyecto denominado fortalecer las capacidades de enseñanza del idioma inglés a través de la implementación de un plan de capacitación docente y la creación de comunidades de aprendizaje y práctica entre docentes, educadores y formadores de inglés de los países miembros de la Alianza del Pacífico. And talking about the webinar itself, the first session, Planning for Learning, will explore how effective lesson planning begins with clear and meaningful objectives that guide classroom practices and support the students' progress. The second session, Assessment for Learning, will provide an opportunity to reflect on how assessment can become a tool to support and strengthen learning. Both sessions aim to provide realistic and practical tools that can directly support your teaching practice, strengthen decision-making in the classroom, and promote more meaningful learning experiences for your students. We would like to thank the British Council for their support and collaboration in making this professional learning and exchange space possible. We also extend our special recognition and gratitude to our speakers, Leonel Corradi and Gabriel Diaz Maglioli, for sharing their experience, knowledge, and best practices with all of us. Finally, we invite you to actively participate throughout the sessions by sharing your reflections and experiences in the chat. We are confident that this exchange among colleagues will enrich this collaborative learning space. Thank you very much for joining us today. Once again, welcome everyone. Enjoy the sessions.
Thank you very much for your words, Mariana. I would like to now invite you to join us with the audience and this seminar. Thank you again. Now it's time to begin learning. Let me welcome our first speaker, Leonor Corradi. She is a teacher education and curriculum specialist with extensive experience in English language teaching and teacher education. She has led major language education initiatives in Argentina and contributed to curriculum reform. She currently directs postgraduate programs at UNPAS University. The title of her presentation is Planning for Learning. In this presentation, Leonor will demonstrate how teachers can design purposeful, achievable tasks in large classrooms and low resource context. Welcome, Leonor.
Thank you for your words. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be hosting this webinar, and I want to thank Alianza del Pacífico Programa de Inglés for this invitation. So let's start with our presentation, and just something for you to know. I mean, we are very quite used to working with large groups, very few resources, so our contexts, despite the differences, are quite similar. And it is from the classroom that I speak, not from behind the desk. So this is a tour of what we will be doing today. I start with an example. We'll analyze 2 lessons and different activities in the lessons. You will arrive at conclusions, and finally, we will focus on your takeaways. So let me start by posing a question to you. Suppose you're organizing a road trip to Punta Arenas. That's the red dot at the very south of Chile and the very south of South America. Would you go with A? I mean, you start driving south. That's the only possible way. No definite plans. You just see where life takes you. Or B, do you plan your road trip considering the distance, the time available, the resources you have? I think that most would choose B. I know I would. You might be wondering, why am I talking about a road trip when this is about planning? Well, actually, because I want to establish a parallel between this road trip and where we want to take our learners. So let's now plunge into English. On the left, you have an activity, color the numbers. There is an icon so students know exactly what they have to do. The teaching point is definitely numbers 1 to 10. Now, let me ask you this question for you to reflect. From the point of view of English language, will students listen to numbers? Will they read numbers as words? Will they say numbers, or will they write numbers as words? The answer is no. So the idea is that when we plan our lessons, doesn't matter whether we use a course book, whether we use different sorts of materials, when we plan any lesson, either a lesson or a whole week or a unit or the whole year, we need to be very sure and very clear about where we want our students to go. So if I plan from this perspective for numbers, and I start working with learning objectives, then it would look quite different. I won't end up with going somewhere else if I want to travel south. Learning objectives are can-do statements which very clearly describe what learners will be able to do as a result of our teaching, as a result of instruction. So for numbers, if I have to teach numbers, these are my learning objectives. I want students to recognize numbers up to 10 if spoken slowly and clearly. I want my students to recognize numbers up to 10 in short phrases and sentences if spoken slowly and clearly. Now, what's the difference between the second one and the first one? In the first one, it's just words in isolation, so numbers in isolation. In the second one, in a wider, bigger context, because this is a text, a very short one, they have to recognize or identify numbers. So this is the difference between the first learning objective and the second one, showing growth. As regards reading, I want my students to be able to read numbers up to 10 written as words. And again, then I also want them to recognize numbers up to 10 written as words in short texts. As regards speaking, I want them to be able to say numbers up to 10 with support. And then I want them to write numbers up to 10 written as words. So these are all my learning objectives. And when I plan, this is what I have in mind to say, okay, what activities do I need to plan so that students should be able to do all this as regards numbers? So here's one strategy that you can apply in your lessons. Ready? Here we go. For any topic that you have to teach, whether it's a vocabulary area, a grammar point, or functions, for instance, water please, here you are, thank you. I have to start thinking in terms of can-do statements as my starting point. And there will be can-do statements for listening, remembering that students first need to listen and recognize, and then listen and recognize or identify in short texts. The same thing for reading. Students should be able to read and recognize, then read and recognize or identify in short texts. They need to be able to say or to express different ideas with support, always for A1, A2 learners. And the same thing for writing. They can write with support, A1, A2 learners, and following a model. So this is my starting point. This is my strategy. When I start planning, I have to think about all these learning objectives. Now, this icon here on my right, I don't know where you can see it. You've got two hands with a camera, with a phone, actually. Can you take a picture of this? Because we will go back to these learning objectives. So I will give you a couple of seconds for you to take a photo. Guess you've already done that. Now, of course, all these learning objectives we won't do in the same lesson unless your lesson lasts for the whole week. So let's move on now to an example. So this is from a course book for young learners. This is Storyline 1, Unit 2 from Pearson. And why do I start at 5? Because exercise 1 was the presentation, the dialogue for presentation. Exercise 2 was comprehension for that exercise, general comprehension. Exercises 3 and 4 focus on one area of vocabulary, which is elements in a classroom: chair, table, desks, board, window, lamp, that sort of thing. So for the example, I just want to focus on colors. So here we go. These are the first two activities, 5A and B, not 5 and 6 because they are related. So in the first activity, students are supposed to listen and point to those color splotches that they have. So the teacher would go something like blue, pink, green, and students point to the different colors. In the second one, students listen and number. So the teacher or the recording, the audio, will go along these lines. Blue is number 1. Yellow is number 2. Red is number 3. So the learning objectives for these two activities: the first one, students can recognize colors in short phrases. Colors if spoken slowly and clearly. That's exercise 5A. For 5B, students can recognize colors in short phrases and sentences if spoken slowly and clearly. So this is okay for my planning. How about the other two activities, 6A and 6B? In 6A, students have to listen and color. So the teacher's instructions, or in Yoda, you will get sentences like the pen is green, the table is blue, the chair is red. And let's focus on the second one. So for the first one, the learning objective is students can recognize colors in short phrases and sentences if spoken slowly and clearly. The learning objective, which was the starting point for the second one, is that students should be able to recognize colors in short written texts. In short texts, but what about reading and identifying colors? So listening was okay because they listen and recognize, then they listen and recognize or identify in short texts. So that was fine, point to the different colors and then number the colors. And let's say the short phrases or short sentences where blue is number 1. For reading, we know that students should be able to read and recognize, and then read and recognize or identify in short text or in short phrases or sentences, which is the case of this activity. So what we can do in this case, because I'm starting from my learning objectives and not planning activity 1, 2, 3, and 4, I add an activity. So on the board, what I do is I write the colors. Of course, not in the same order in which you find them in the book and not in the order after they've numbered them, random order. And so I would go, for instance, with, I start with pink, blue, or green. Why? Because they start with a consonant, and those consonants are quite similar to the Spanish consonants. There's a difference in their phonological value, but basically students can recognize them. So I will start with them identifying where it says pink, where it says blue, where it says green. So when they've sorted out 3 options, so they have only 3 left. So you've reduced the number of options. I wouldn't start with white because W is quite, it's not a very frequent letter in the Spanish alphabet. So maybe I'd start with yellow, in which they have the Y sound and the L for them to be able to identify where it says yellow. Then I would go maybe with white, yes, because of the T sound they can recognize, and red. Even though the R exists in both languages, the thing is that their phonological manifestation is quite different. So in this way, students then read the colors and then they number the colors, they write the colors and they number them. So they have another activity. Or the second option is using exercise 6B. What I would ask students to do for them to focus on the color words is ask them first to underline school supplies, school objects, or school items. So for instance, pen, chair, glue, that sort of thing. And then I would go exactly in the same way, starting from pink, blue, or green, and then with the other colors. If I feel that I'm going too fast or something, please write that in the chat box. So I have to plan more activities. I have to plan speaking activities. Of course, I won't be able to cover everything in one lesson. So I planned another lesson, but I don't start with speaking because I need to revise. I need to remind students of different colors. So what I will use in this case is flashcards. So this is how it goes. Let me change that. So this is the question. Is this blue? What do you think? Is it blue? Yes or no? Is it white? Could you see that? That was even faster. Is this red? So remember that I told you to take a picture of the different learning objectives. So please write in the chat box. what's the learning objective, which was the starting point for this activity? Yes, it is. I see that. Yes, you are answering the question before. So think about what's the learning objective. Remember, is this pink, yellow? You're saying the words perfectly. Now, remember that students are producing, but the students are producing just yes or no. So they recognize colors through through a simple question. So the learning objective, you're right, the learning objective is this one. Students can recognize colors in short phrases and sentences if spoken slowly and clearly. Remember the activity which was point to red, point to blue? In this case, you can make it a little bit more challenging because you have to follow the sequence when pointing, and you can use the same color splotches in the book or just elements in the classroom. So the first one may be following the sequence, point to red and blue, and students will do that. The second one may be point to red, blue, and green. When we do that, when students have to follow a sequence, in order to remember the sequence, they will be repeating that in their heads, a kind of silent speaking. This is what we naturally do. Suppose that you're given a number, I mean, not just a two-figure number, but a longer number. And you have to remember that till you find either your phone to write it down or pen and paper. What do we do so as to remember the sequence, remember the numbers in this case? We just repeat them in our heads. So this is a natural process that we do so as to remember a sequence. So the students will be saying colors in their heads. And then, even though they will be listening, but they will be saying colors in their heads. So what's the learning objective in this case? Is it the same as the previous one? What do you think? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to come up with an answer. And the answer is yes, exactly the same learning objective as before. So it's not that I have just one activity for each learning objective. Most probably there will be several activities for different learning objectives. Now we can start speaking. In this case, still, I'm using flashcards. So you have to repeat if correct. So if I say red, you will say red. If I say green, you will say green. If I say white, you'll say white. If I say blue, you remain silent. So what's the learning objective now? Is it the same as before? Can recognize colors in short phrases if spoken slowly and clearly? No, definitely no, because now they are using colors. They can say colors with support. The support was what I was saying. Now, even though this is repetition, but this is absolutely meaningful repetition. Why? Because in order to decide whether to repeat or not, you have to understand the colors. Otherwise, you will be repeating anything. So even though this is repetition, it's meaningful repetition. Another activity could be what color is. And in this case, we focus on transparent words. So for instance, crocodile, lemon, jeans. Most probably, maybe in the case of crocodile, because of the pronunciation, you may just write it on the board and students will definitely identify a crocodile. You can have them directly answer the question, what color is a crocodile? Hopefully they will say green. Or you may start by giving them options. 2 options maybe at the beginning. What color is a crocodile? Yellow or green? And then maybe 3 options. What color is a lemon? White, green, or yellow? The learning objective, the same as the previous one. Is it they can say colors with support? What do you think? Is it the same? Yes, it's exactly the same. They can say colors with support. The support in this case are not only the words, so they are not using colors, they are not saying colors spontaneously. At some point, they will. After several activities, at some point, words will come, colors will be part of their system. They will know colors and they will use them naturally. In this case, the support is the words that I write on the board or that I say, and at the beginning, the options that I'm giving them. Let's have some other activities. In these cases, say the color. Think about easy words to draw. For instance, a tree, a cloud, a heart, the sun, a pig, or a whale. In this case, the pig, this is my own creation, just a couple of ovals, circles, 2 triangles for the head and spiral for the tail. And then you don't need to draw the complete whale, just the tail of the whale, which is quite easy to draw. So how about the learning objective? Is it the same as the previous one? They can say colors with support or a new one. Take your time to think. Remember, you can go back to the photo you've taken. And yes, they can say colors with support. So I can think of an activity and draw or kind of come out with a learning objective for that activity, especially the ones which come with course books or from the materials that we use. Or I can start the other way about. When I am planning my lessons, when I'm organizing everything, I start with a learning objective. So I want my students to be able to say colors, any area, with support. So one activity won't work miracles. So I need to plan different activities. So the activities I've just presented, very simple activities. Repeat if correct. What's this? With the drawings. I can also show unfinished drawings, not for colors, but for example, if I'm teaching school supplies, school objects, I may start going like this and on the board, and then kids can tell you it's a pencil, it's a pencil case, it's an eraser. Have covered flashcards. Why have covered? Because if I show this and I say, what's this? It's silly. Nobody would ask a question if everybody can see that. So what if I ask you, what's this? Still don't know. I can show a bigger part. What's this? I don't know if you can get it. It's kind of blurred. Maybe here. Yes. So I'm showing different parts for students to finally get what it is, a marker. As I said before, using flashing flashcards as I did, for example, you just do like this, or you just wave them out, or drawings in the air. For instance, if this is, I'm working with school supplies, school objects. What is this? Did you get it? That's a pencil case. So there are plenty of activities. When we plan, we think, we start from learning objectives, and from the learning objectives, we come up with different activities. Some that you will find in the course book or in the materials that you're using, and some others that you will include. We had lots of speaking activities, and then we have to move on to writing. So an easy one to start is from the activity. Remember, say the color with the drawings. I can ask students to make the same drawings, to draw in their notebooks, in their binders, whatever they use, and then write the color. The learning objective, they can write colors with support. Why do I make it a point of the drawing and the color? Because then it can serve as reference. If they have just the colors, and they can't remember what color each word represents, then it's not very useful. And the same thing for this activity. So these are tags. Sometimes we put tags on boxes so as to identify what's inside. So that's something meaningful to write. In this case, I include the splotch so that they just color it in, so that they've got the word and the concept. So again, the learning objective is the same as before. Students can write colors with support. Any questions so far? Remember to write that in the comments box. So strategy 2. The first one, remember, was considering the learning objectives for reading, listening, speaking, writing. Strategy 2 is to remember that when we plan, recognition has to come before production. So that is listening before speaking, reading before writing, and production with support all the time. And if they are writing more than just words or short phrases, there has to be a model. So I've been talking about young learners. What about older learners? In this case, this is a book that I've chosen for adolescents in secondary schools. The source is Look Wide 1 from Pearson. So what's the teaching point? If you can read that, hope you can. The teaching point is can. Now, what are the learning objectives? It's not that students should learn can. Remember that learning objectives describe what students can do. And what we do in terms of languages in general is we read, we listen, we speak, we write. So it's not talking about can or learning can. That's not a learning objective. Remember, learning objectives are about being able to use the language. I'm just showing you this is a complete lesson. I'm focusing on the part on the left, exercises 1 and 2, because those are the ones that focus on can ability. On the right, the book brings other uses of can, ability, but also requests, permission, and possibility. There you've got a zooming in of that part, but I'm focusing on can ability. So in the first one, students are supposed to read the text. I'll just read it to you because I think it's quite small. Silvio Velo is from Argentina. He can play football well, but he can't see. He's blind. His nickname, Messi of the Blind. Tamara Vega is a young Mexican woman. She's a pentathlon athlete. She can swim, run, shoot, ride horses, do fencing. She can do taekwondo too. So the learning objective for this one is students can read and understand. The second activity, let me read it out in case the screen is too small. Think about Gordon Reed, the tennis player. What can he do? Tick the boxes according to what you think, according to your ideas, and then ask your teacher. So in this case, the underlying learning objective for this activity is that students can ask about or express ability or lack of ability with support. So in this case, what I see is that maybe they need something before they can express ability with support. Mind you, I'm not saying that these course books or any course book is not good. Course books cannot bring everything that we want to do. They are general by nature. Often you've got some of these ideas in the teacher's books, but the idea is that we should plan for learning. So we decide what to include so that we can, let's say, take all the learning objectives and as many as we need. So what can we do so as to provide students with support before they do this activity? Possibility one, the teacher tells students about Reed's abilities. You've got the key in the teacher's book, of course. So you would go something along these lines. Do you know Gordon Reed? I mean, he can play a sport. I mean, look, he's in a wheelchair, but he can play a sport. He can't dance, but he can communicate and read. He can't walk, but he can use a computer. So that's the first part, listening. I ask students, I mean, they would be ticking the boxes. Then I ask them to look at the boxes and the ticks carefully for maybe 15 seconds. Then they close. And then I check their memory. So what about sport? You have to tell me he can play a sport or he can't play a sport. So I provide support. So what about, tell me the action is communicate, walk, use a computer. So I've organized this so that there was listening and then speaking with support. So the support was first the listening, the activities that they have there in the book, yes, but in the form of a memory game, because otherwise it would be silly if they've already got the ticks and the ticks in the activity. It wouldn't be natural, meaningful to repeat what everybody has just heard. Another possibility is to refer students to the WhatsApp message in which Dan asks, can Silvio swim? And Veronica answers, I don't know. So I focus students' attention on that, on the chart in which they have statements in the affirmative. Silvio can play football. Silvio can't see. And then questions. So can Veronica speak English? Yes, she can. Can Dan speak English very well? No, he can't. He's learning. So I refer students to the box. Then I say, okay, let's see the abilities in this group. So if the answer is yes, you raise your hand. You say, yes, I can, and you raise your hand. If the answer is no, remember, how do you answer? And I refer students back to the chart. And so you don't raise your hand and you just say, no, I can't. So can you swim? And so I'll see the hands up. Can you ride a bike? Mm-hmm. Can you ride a horse? So just tell me if I got it right. All of you using gesture, all of you, second A, fourth B, can swim. Yes or no? Okay. Maybe a group can ride a horse. Yes or no? Or was it a big group? Or a big group can ride a bike. And maybe it was all. So, and then I ask students to do exercise 2. So before that I say, okay, how will you ask the questions? How will you ask me about Gordon Reed's abilities? So in this second case, I refer students to the box. And then there was listening, yes, in which I asked the questions, they answered. Then there was general, my understanding whether I have a good memory or not. And then they start speaking. So this was my planning for this for this half of the lesson. The planning for me was to cover these learning objectives, that students should be able to recognize ability and lack of ability in short written texts that I can use the material in the book, can recognize ability and lack of ability in short oral texts if spoken slowly and clearly. It was not part of the activity, maybe it was part of a teacher's book, but then I provided instances. Can express ability and lack of ability with support, that was in the activities. Can write about ability and lack of ability with support writing. Now, what did I plan for this? Because it was not included in the book. The following lesson, because I won't be able to cover this in one lesson, so the following lesson, I start with a speaking activity, a chain game. Now, why the warning sign? Before I start, I ask students to tell me different activities. And I write them on the board. making sure that I tell them that the activities that they tell me have to be about abilities. So write would be okay, sing would be okay, watch TV won't be okay. This is not about ability. So that's a further instance to focus on the notion of ability, the concept of ability. So first, I ask them to come up with as many actions as they can. They can check the book, they can check their notes. I write all the actions on the board, and then I go with a chain game. So I start. I can swim. Student number one, I colon student. He or she will say, Leonor can swim, I can run. The following student, not following the order because otherwise they won't be paying attention, just anybody in the group. They have to repeat the whole sequence. Leonor can swim, Augusto can run, that was student number one, I can ride a bike, and so on and so forth. Why did I write the first part in brackets? Because you may decide to have students only repeating what the previous one had said. If you ask for the whole sequence, it's more challenging. You force everybody to listen, and at the same time, they will be repeating the sequence in their heads. So with this activity, with a chain game, I work on listening, I work on speaking objectives, and then following the chain game, this is the task that I give them. Write about your friends or your classmates' abilities. Can you remember 10? Here's one. Augusto can run. So I use the same activity as before, which means that the first time, suppose that I say, I can't remember. Okay, so let's have another round, but this time everybody has to pay attention. And the learning objective in this case is can write about ability and lack of ability with support. The first time, maybe you work only with affirmative instances. The second round, maybe you can cover affirmative and negative as well. So this is my planning for learning for this activity, for this page from the... For lesson 1, my learning objectives were the following. That students should be able to recognize ability and lack of ability in short texts. The same thing for listening and expression of ability or lack of ability with support for speaking. The following lesson, it's not that I move on. I have students recognizing ability and lack of ability in short oral texts. This was the chain game in which there's listening and speaking. The one saying the chain is the one speaking, but remember that everybody will be saying the sequence in their heads. Then can express ability and lack of ability with support, and then they can write about ability and lack of ability again with support. The support was the chain game. And just in case, remember the warning, they will have the verbs, the actions on the board for them to remember. Suppose that this is the following lesson. For some reason, you couldn't do that same lesson. Take a photo of that. And the following time you start the lesson by asking students, remember the chain last time? What activities did you talk about? What abilities did you have? Do you remember? Can you dictate them to me and you write them on the board, or you have somebody write them on the board? If you remember, strategy 2 was recognition before production, and production always with support. But here's another strategy based on the planning, the previous planning, this planning that I showed you. So I don't go listening, then reading, or reading, then listening, speaking, writing. Not linearly, but following this spiral approach. So I start with listening, then I organize, maybe using a course book or any materials, I organize a reading activity, maybe then another listening, but you see that the spiral is getting wider. that means that this listening will be wider, let's say, in scope, maybe a longer text, or including, revising, integrating other elements. From that listening, maybe a speaking activity, yes. Then I may have another reading. Suppose there is a blog page in which students from different parts of the world introduce themselves. So they will be using personal information, not just abilities and lack of abilities, but personal information, including abilities or lack of abilities. So again, wider in scope than the first reading. It could be maybe a longer text, but also integrating other elements. From that block, I can have a speaking activity, I can design one, having students maybe first comparing or trying to see what they find in common, what they have in common with maybe the people whose blogs they've read about. Maybe a writing activity in which they have the model for reading, and then there were examples from speaking as well. Maybe another listening, and from that listening, remember, wider in scope than a writing activity. Not in this order at all, but what I mean is that you should combine, again, it's not linear, not 1, 2, 3, 4, ready, 1, 2, 3, 4, but spiral. So you're permanently revising and integrating concepts. If you remember the unit on colors for young learners, in the activity in which they had to color, so the writers included colors, school objects, such as pen, glue, eraser from Unit 1. And then there was a table and a chair. Those were items from that unit, exercises 3 and 4. So this is the idea, to integrate everything. So whether I use a course book or other materials, when I plan for learning, so it's not just when I organize lessons. When I organize a lesson, that means that I get my materials and I say, okay, today this is an 80-minute block. So that means that I can do activity 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5, maybe half of 5. So next class, Friday, the end of the week, everybody's tired. That's a short period, just 40 minutes. So just I will do half of exercise 5, which they didn't finish, and exercise 6. In this case, this is just organizing, but we've seen that there's much more to planning. If we want the students to learn, there's much more than that. So how can we go about that? First, either reading the unit, if it's a course book, or reading the materials, whatever it is that you're using. The second step, in bold, because this is the most important part. This is where you list the learning objectives for the topic or the topics of the unit or the topics from the materials. Usually in every unit, there will be at least one area of vocabulary and one grammar point, at least. So we list the learning objectives, and remember, the learning objectives are about listening, speaking, reading, or writing. Yes, they are not about using can or using the simple present tense. Once I've got my learning objectives, then I see how I will plan them. Yes, starting, of course, from listening and reading, and knowing that if I finish the lesson with a speaking activity next class, I have to revise something, some recognition before production, even though they've been producing already maybe a little bit. But the following class, I have to start from recognition again, and then move on to production. In other case, whether I use a course book or other materials, I have to remember that planning should be spiral. I mean, not just a coil, because a coil doesn't grow, doesn't show any growth. Yes, a coil, resorte, doesn't show any growth, while this spiral does show growth. Either because texts can be a little bit more complex, or because you are integrating different areas. So reflection time. Let's see if we can start with some reflection. If you want to, you can write the answers in the chat box. Anyway, I will show the answers. And this can help you reach conclusions. So when I plan with learning objectives as a starting point, it helps me follow a clear route. So I don't go south and end up anywhere, but I know where I want to go, and that's the direction in which I will go. So how do you feel about this? Would that be a yes? Would that be a no? Some are saying that I love working with books, but sometimes it's not possible. That's why, I use just a sample of a course book, but these are simple activities that you can design yourself. And that's why in the previous slide, I showed that you can use either course books or any other materials. It's not that unless you use a course book, you cannot teach. Any materials will do. So the first one, yeah, that's a big yes. What about the second one? When I plan with learning objectives as a starting point, it means that I need to use lots of photocopies and material resources. I think that yes comes from the previous one. Time for you to think. Okay, so I can see now lots of no's. No, that's a big no. Next one, when I start, then one more. When I plan with learning objectives as a starting point, I need to cover listening, reading, speaking, and writing objectives in every lesson. Even if the lesson is, let's say, a long one, usually in my context, a long one is 80 minutes. Usually teaching periods last 40 minutes. So a long one is a block of 2 teaching periods. So no, I don't need to cover everything in one lesson. That would be, again, impossible. And when I plan with learning objectives as a starting point, I can see what activities I need to plan for students to learn. What do you think about this? In a way that's connected with the first one. If I was given, remember the first activity, color the numbers, most probably if I start from learning objectives, I would very easily realize that that is impossible because it's not helping students reach any objectives. So the answer is yes. As you said, yes. So what are the takeaways from this lesson? And I want to make it a point because sometimes, in 50 minutes, I know that there was lots that I was saying, so maybe some things you may skip some of the things. So let me go over the takeaways. There are quite a number of activities that you can use next class. I've used few or not resources. I've used flashcards. If you don't have flashcards, you can create them. Just cut out different colors for colors, draw them. That's very easy, or point. Or you can ask students to create their own flashcards. That's something else that we can do. But actually, I did use resources, which to me are very valuable. I use the board a lot, and I showed you how to use the board. I use students. They like talking about their lives. They feel involved when they form part of the lesson. So, of course, lessons will be about people somewhere else, people whose lives may be interesting because we learn about new things such as the blind football player or the pentathlon athlete. But then I move on to have students talk about their own lives. That's another resource. And then a resource, if you remember, I asked students for colors maybe to copy the drawings, to make the drawings, and then write the words, because then that's another resource that they can use, their own notebook or binder, whatever they use. So when we tell them you have to revise for the following lesson because there will be some assessment, because not only for assessment, because you will be doing presentations, then they have that as a reference. So that's another resource that I use. So students notes, the board, yes, and me just trying to imagine how I can help students, especially speak and write, without having lots of photocopies and all the rest of it. I've worked on different strategies for planning, for different ways of planning. And then I do want to stress the importance of starting with learning objectives, what my students can do at the end of one lesson, at the end of a week, at the end of a unit, at the end of a month, even at the end of the year. And then I design or I adapt activities accordingly. Why planning for learning? Because I have my students in mind as a starting point. So I don't teach the book. I don't teach the materials that I use. I teach my learners and I have them in my mind. And since I start from learning objectives, and learning objectives are about students being able to use the language, this is how I plan for learning to take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonor. I'm sure we have many questions from the audience, but we will answer them at the end. Please remember that the sessions will be recorded and you will be able to watch them with subtitles. However, we feel it is very important that you also have the opportunity to be exposed to the language to support your development. Now, we will continue with our second speaker of today, Dr. Gabriel Diaz Maggioli. He is an international recognized expert in teacher education and professional development. He has worked with educators worldwide and held leadership roles in TESOL and IATEF. He currently serves as president-elect of TESOL International Association and leads programs at Universidad Hort, Uruguay. Gabriel will explore how English teachers can use assessment for learning to support learners in real classrooms. Welcome, Gabriel.
Hello and welcome everybody to the second part of this very interesting webinar. Thank you, Leonor, for giving us so much food for thought. And I would particularly like to thank La Alianza del Pacífico and particularly La Red de Inglés for this very nice invitation. And also, as I said before, I'm here thanks to Paula Rebolledo, who was the one who convened this webinar. What we are going to be looking at is a different aspect of what Leonor has been saying. The title of my webinar is Assessment for Learning, but I wanted to be more explicit. So I called it Small Checks, Big Learning. Assessment for learning in the English classroom. And as a tag, what we're going to try and do is learn how to see learning, how to help students, and decide what to do next. So you're coming from this frame of mind where you teach your students, and what you do is look at their needs and design learning objectives. Now, I'm looking at the next end of this part, right? I'm looking at assessment for learning, where you start with the goals, then the students interact during the lesson, and supposedly they learn. And what we want is learning that sticks. But how do we know if they have learned? Because teaching is immediately visible, right? The teacher does something and you can see the teacher doing something. But how about learning? learning is a little bit trickier to see. And what I'm going to try and do is share with you a few very practical ideas and also some principles about assessment for learning to help us see, right? Now, I don't want to anticipate anything, but assessment is not a favorite word for many teachers. So I'm going to ask you to write in the chat in one word, and please, I know teachers are the worst students. They don't follow instructions. But here I'm going to try and ask you to do this. One word. When you hear the word assessment, what do you think of? Put it in the chat so that I can see it. We have somebody saying consciousness. You see, somebody has already given more than a word. Test, grade, difficulties, grades, grading, evaluation. Oh my God. Yeah. We all feel like that. And if we teachers think of assessment and think of that, imagine what our students feel, right? The idea in here is very simple. You learned with Leonor the planning phase, goals and activities, right? What we're going to do is put the second part of the puzzle here, which is how to check and, more importantly, how to help the students. So here are my learning outcomes for you for today. And look at the difference that I'm using here. I'm not talking about learning objectives because they are for the learning part. I'm talking about the learning outcomes, what happens at the end, what comes out of learning, because this is what I expect to be able to use to check that my objectives have been accomplished. And these are learning outcomes for you. At the end of this webinar, I would like you to be able to explain assessment for learning in simple terms. But it's important that we all understand it in the same way so that we all use the same language. And when I say assessment for learning, and we're going to learn a definition, we are not going to be thinking about tests. We are not going to be thinking about grades. We are not going to be thinking about exams. Assessment for learning has a specific meaning. I want you to be able to identify where to assess in a textbook lesson, in a regular lesson with your own materials. And one thing that happens is that for many, many years, when we think of assessment at the end. Now here, we are going to take assessment as part of teaching and learning throughout the lesson, before, during, and after, every time students practice using the language. I want you to be able to use three, again, I'm following Leonor's advice, low resource strategies. One is fingers, the other one is traffic lights, or traffic lights. The other one is ABCD cards, and an exit sentence, and a surprise bonus strategy that we are going to see at the end. I want you to be able to learn how to use one focus observation strategy, which is listen for one thing. And then we were asked to prepare an activity that you can do on your own after the webinar, right? And that you will try to implement in your classes so as to put these ideas into action. Does this sound like a plan? Yes? So let's move on. What is assessment for learning? we're not going to go into a very academic definition. As we've seen from your answers to the chat, when you hear the word assessment, you think of more tests, more evaluations, more grading. And no, this is not assessment for learning. Assessment for learning are small checks that we put before, during, and at the end of the lesson to make sure that our students are learning what we want them to learn. So what we are doing is like live checking by looking, by listening, and of course, the final purpose is not that, I already taught this, yo ya lo di. No. If my students are experiencing difficulty, how can I help them? Okay? So, if we were to take a metaphor of a road and a trip, like Leonor used to start her own presentation, I would say that the journey, the trip from planning to assessment, basically has this: a very clear learning objective, a goal, activities that the students do. And that comes from Leonor's planning section. What I want to add is how we can check that this happens and how we can help the learners if they cannot yet do it. And you will see there are a lot of hearts in my presentation. And this is because the way I conceive of assessment is a way of caring, of taking care of our students, of not just saying, as I said, lo di, no aprendieron, sorry. No, it's look how we can do these checks so that the students get closer to what we want them to achieve. So, remember this. In order to implement assessment for learning, we need to cover some steps. The first one is a very clear learning objective, a goal. Students can, the can do statements. If they can do it, they can show it to you, then you can check that they attained the learning objective. So how do you get there? Well, first of all, you have to gather evidence. It's like if you were a detective and you were with a very big magnifying glass, which may be your eyes or your ears, looking for evidence. So what do you see? What do you hear the students do? And then you have to make a decision. The decision is, okay, I look at my 48 students in a class, I apply one of these techniques that I'm going to show you, and I see that more than 3/4 of the class can do it. So we continue. But if I see that half of the class only can do it and the other half cannot, well, maybe I should repeat either an activity for practice, an explanation. I have to look for another way of showing them how to do it. And then what you do is you change again. Finally, we have to provide students with help. And the best help is that of feedback. Now, feedback is telling the students, and listen to this carefully, what they have done well, and that is the first. What they could do better, so you can tell them where to focus, but more importantly, give them a clue, some help of how they can do it better. And this is what we're going to be learning today, right? So remember, keeping it simple, Assessment for learning has 4 steps. Remember the steps? Clear goals, evidence, making the decision, do I continue? Do I stop here and review? Or do I change? And then after you made the decision and the students are showing you how much or little they are learning, provide them with specific help, right? Which is basically the way in which you make the students grow. Remember also that assessment for learning is not more tests, it's not more grades, it's not more paperwork. Actually, as you will see, assessment for learning is visual or oral, audio information that you get, right? So there's no need for you to say, oh my God, I have to correct more papers, I have to give them more tests. No, no, no. That is not assessment for learning. We're using assessment to support learning. Assessment for learning is actually these small checks and that clear feedback. Remember what they've done well before what they haven't done very well. And of course, how to improve, right? These small checks and this clear feedback lead you to making better decisions. And let's look at a page from a course book, right? This course book is called Smart Players. It has come out this year. I know that colleagues in Peru and Mexico, at least, are going to see this book in bookstores because it's going to be sold in those countries. I had the honor of writing the teachers' books for the very talented writing of the students' book, right? And this is a typical grammar lesson that you may find in any course book, but this one has a twist. If you look at the top, you can see that there is like a progress line that tells the students where they are in relation to the rest of the unit. Then you have an activity with a clear signpost here, listen and read. And when you read this very simple dialogue, basically you see language that is transparent for the students. But it doesn't matter how transparent we think the language is. We have to check that what we think they understand, they understand. Of course, in most course books and in your planning as well, you do activities like matching, right? And then after you've done the activity, you go like, okay, number 1, who can give me the answer? How about number 2, number 3, number 4? Well, here you're getting the answer, but you are not getting whether the students are learning about it or not. And then, of course, another thing that you see here is that the students are asked to do a role play of this conversation, right? Again, how are you going to know that the students have learned that? And I don't know if you can see very clearly here, but at the bottom of each page, there is a learning outcome. I can statement. For this particular grammar page, the goal says, I can understand personal questions. Okay, on this page, the purpose is not, as we'll do the same thing Leonor did, it's not for you to have the students ask questions naturally. They can understand personal questions. So, for example, if you are a teacher like me, you need to check spelling and pronunciation, and you need to check grammar, and so many things. But my learning outcome here is if my students understand when I ask them a question like, who is he? And they can answer, he is my uncle. If I ask a student, what does he do? What is his occupation? And he gives me he says he's a firefighter or simply firefighter, right? Then I can make sure that I'm hearing the evidence that they understand. But if I ask them, spell firefighter for me, it makes no sense because it has nothing to do with my learning outcome. So if the goal is personal questions, then my checks must focus on personal questions. I'm giving you here the references to the author of the book, of the student's book, and the author of the teacher's book. And these are all published by Macmillan. So we see a page of any material, right? I didn't want to create materials when we already have course books, but I am aware that many, many of you do not have course books and that you create your own materials, right? Just this advice, I wanted to have some structure, and that is why I'm presenting the book to you. So let's look at the first thing. We need to have alignment, right, between the learning outcome and the way that I try to see if they understand. So the learning outcome is I can understand personal questions. Can you say in the chat, please, which check you feel is better, A or B? Yeah. It's very, very clear. It's B. You may be thinking, well, but this is so simple. Well, I'm using a simple example because there is no magic behind this. It's just common sense. Common sense that you don't keep to yourself is common sense that you communicate to your students as well. I see some of you are asking questions in the chat. We have somebody monitoring the questions. Let me thank you for asking the questions, but we are going to wait until the end of the presentation to answer questions both from Leonor's webinar and mine. So we are looking for this magic word, alignment, learning outcome, and the kind of check. So let's do a strategy one. No matter what material you're using in your classrooms, you can get the students to create cards, right? I usually favor very simple cards in 4 different colors so that we all have red is A, yellow is B, blue is C, and green is D, for example, right? And the students have them in an envelope that they paste at the back of their notebook. So they bring them to class every single day. Another thing you can do is something like this. It looks like a palette. Like a racket, palette, oh my God. And on the one side, it has a tick. The other side, it has a cross. You can do this as a craft in the classroom. And the students also have it in their notebook. You can use this to elicit true or false, yes or no, agree or disagree. And if you are a little bit more sophisticated, you do it with 4 cards, right? And this is a way of checking quickly whether the students are understanding, right? Basically, for example, the teacher writes on the board 4 questions. Remember, we are trying to assess whether our students can understand questions. That's why they are not producing the questions yet. They are understanding the questions. The teacher writes the 4 questions. Who is he? What is his name? How old is he? What does he do? And then the teacher says to the students, he's a firefighter. And the students pick up the card that corresponds to the correct question. You can do this for vocabulary. You can do this for whatever. One of the things that happens with this technique is that it never grows old. And you don't have to even write things on the board. You can just use your fingers for A, B, C, D, and just say, A, who is he? B, what's his name? C, how old is he? D, what does he do? And now I'm going to say the sentence. He's 40 years old. And the students will pick up card C, right? This, because you are seeing all the class raising one card at the same time, and you can see the colors of the cards, then it tells you whether the students really understand or not. Very simple, no rocket science. But for the students, and now let's step back and go into the student's head. They are doing something with English even though they are not speaking. They are recognizing something and showing you that they can do it. So that has a positive effect on the students. And for you, you don't have to plan anything specific. You could use some class time. For example, when you're teaching the alphabet, let's create letter cards, A, B, C, D. When you're teaching the numbers 1 to 5 or whatever, right? So it's a simple technique that you implement in, you know how long? Less than a minute. And it gives you information about where your students are, right? And you may be saying, okay, but I have to explain how to use the cards. It's a very simple kind of procedure, right? The teacher just goes like, listen, choose A, B, C, D, show me. And then if they did it correctly, say, good. Or you may say, let's try again. Now, this is a routine. It doesn't work if you do it only once and with one topic. This should be part of your assessment for learning repertoire, right? And you will see that as soon as you tell the students, take out your number cards or your letter cards, they are going to say, okay, right? And they get in an active mood. Now, strategy 2. I call it match, check, fix. And this has to do with another very quick strategy that you can use, even using your materials. Many of us give the students a matching activity. Course books have matching activities at the wazoo, right? But this is the way in which we do it. We put the students in pairs and they match in pairs. They do the activity in pairs. Then each student turns around and faces another student, right? And I'm saying, students sitting in rows, they have one person to their left and one person to the right. So the only thing they do is they turn to the left to work on the activity, and then they turn to the right in order to check that they both have matched the same thing. Now, what happens if a student says, I got a different answer, right? Well, basically, the only thing you do is, okay, let's go over this again and let's fix it. These low affective activities have a very powerful message for students. The message is it is all right to make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, you are learning because you're giving me the opportunity as a teacher to give you another way of doing it. Okay? Typical activity, right? The match, as you can see, this comes from smart players. First, they listened and read. Then they listened again just to make sure. And then they have to match the activities. All this is preparation. Remember that Leonor explained first perception, understanding, and then production. Production here is going to be very controlled because this is the grammar lesson, right? Where we are getting the students to understand the meaning of personal questions. So what you're doing here is with this activity, you are preparing the students for a later role play. In terms of advice, I know we have many students who have problems working with others. Students who are on the autism spectrum, students who are bullies or who are being bullied. Well, there's a whole host of personal situations which are difficult, right? But when you do this very quickly and you just say turn to the left and to the right, okay, you're helping the students develop social skills as well. So the matching can be done alone or it can be done with a partner, but the checking will always be with two more people, right? And then, if needed, together they will fix the answer and the teacher will continue. Now, I've been telling you that you have to gather evidence, right? And I wrote this so that you could read it. In many textbooks, we already have matching activities. We can use them as an assessment if we observe and make decisions. And that is the difference between doing any activity or implementing assessment for learning. If we observe with a purpose how many of the students get it, and based on that observation, we continue, we stop, we review, then we are doing assessment for learning. Students don't realize that. They think they are just doing an activity. But for us, this information is gold because we know who is learning, who is not. So, say the students do this matching activity. Can you put in the chat where the evidence is? And many of you are already answering before me posing the question. When students copy the title, when students match questions and answer, or when they color the picture. Again, it's P. And don't think that this is too simple or is too silly a question. You are thousands, literally. I'm not talking about metaphors here. You are thousands. And I'm sure that some of you may have chosen A or may have chosen C, right? Because in your logic, things work in that way. And that is okay. But I'm also showing you, I'm looking at the evidence of your answers, you see? And that will tell me that I can move on because everybody so far has posted B. So my assessment for learning for this particular activity has been successful. And we know what we do with the evidence. If most students show in what's his occupation, he's a firefighter, D, we move on. But look at this. What happens when students show you the wrong answer? Well, there you have to do three things. First, stop. Then go back and produce another model. Model again, right? And basically, that modeling can incorporate the ABCD cards if you want, or the matching, right? You go to the board because you don't need sophisticated materials. You go to the board and you clarify, you put the board model. If you hadn't put it before, if you didn't have a model before, this will help the students understand, and they will, of course, if you model and explain, right? So remember that checking is not the end, it's just the beginning of assessment for learning, right? What do the checks give you? They give you the information, the evidence. Evidence if students understand. If they understand, continue. If they are confused, then I teach again. And this is what assessment for learning is. It's very simple. Now, strategy number 3, I call it smart fingers, and it comes from, is one of the favorite activities in the Smart Players series. Why? Because it's done very quickly, right? Leonor talked about this lesson from a book about the use of talking about abilities, right? And she explained that Silvio was blind, remember? And the teacher asked a question, can Silvio see? You can have thumbs up, thumbs down, and then I don't know, right? Including the 3 options is fundamental. So how do I do it? Because how do I do the icon? I do thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no, and thumbs in the middle in case they say I don't know. Just giving the students the possibility of saying I don't know, showing you, gives them reassurance. You can also use like 3 fingers if yes, 2 if I don't know, 1 if no. And I don't know why all of a sudden there are balloons in my screen. I think it's maybe because of the. Alrighty. This magic finger thing, once again, these are all routines. You have to establish them as an integral part of your lesson and do them every day. They help you gather evidence, right? And what happens when you see that the hand signal is a lot of I don't know and a lot of wrong things? Now, we go back to what? To the language. After the hand signal, the teacher models, no, he can't. Can Silvio see? No, he can't. Repeat, he can't see. Good. Now, can he play football? And that was a wonderful thing. Silvio can play football. Yes, he can, right? Again, the hand signal is only the first step, right? Then we help the students say the sentence. They need to hear themselves say it, right? So as to become aware of where the words fall, let's say, because they may see language as a stream and not really pay attention. And then as Leonor said, first meaning, then the language. We said first in comprehension, then production. I say here first the meaning. It makes no sense to the students if you talk to them about grammar. First, the meaning. Once you make sure the meaning is there, then you provide the language and you practice. Because what we are trying to do with all these assessment for learning techniques is help the students get to the production stage. And I'm giving you a strategy for you. Excuse me. I needed some water. And this is listen for one thing. We give the students an activity, and what do? Well, ideally, we walk around the classroom, checking that they are doing the activity if you have the opportunity. I worked in classrooms where, because I'm very fat, I cannot fit between the rows. So I cannot monitor to the end of the classroom. But yes, I can hear. I can sharpen my ear to try and pay attention to what some students at the back are saying, right? And that is something you develop as a teacher, right? Even when you are writing on the board and with your back to the class, most of the times you can tell who's talking about nonsense and not talking about the lesson. So here I'm asking you to narrow down to what? To the goal. We go back to the learning objective that now will become, if they've learned, a learning outcome. Okay? So listen for one thing is very simple. Let's say in our lesson from Smart Players 3, you have done all the interpretation, comprehension questions, and now students are given the opportunity to practice the role play, practice the conversation. Of course, this is going to be quite guided, but we are at the beginning. Look at the progress bar. We are at the beginning of the lesson. When we get to the end of the lesson, this will be natural. But I will have made sure that when I played the tape, they understood. I will have made sure that when they read this, they understood. I will have made sure that they can match the right ones. Now let's hear them. And there are no secrets. They have the text here, right? So when we do this thing, listen for one thing, right? What do we focus on? In this case, because we were talking about personal questions, we are focusing on, do they use the question word correctly? Right? Can they use can or can't? No, that was for the other unit, right? The key vocabulary. Can they say firefighter? Because that's the occupation, right? And you're also going to focus on pronunciation. Now, of all those things, which do you think you are going to focus on in this particular role play? You can use the chat to say that. There's a bit of a delay. Are you focusing then on the question words, on can, can't? Are you focusing on key vocabulary or pronunciation? Remember what our learning outcome was. I can understand personal questions. The question words, very good, right? The question words. If I say who and they answer my uncle, If I say how old, one of the students says how old and the other student says 40, we know that the question words are the ones that are telling us what whether they are learning or not. Now, what do you do while you're walking around? Just note down, don't interrupt them. Note down, again, because you're gathering evidence, and if they cannot do it, remember, go back, model, do it again, and finally move on when you feel that they can do it. Now, I'm going to give you a bonus strategy that I like to use in every lesson. And I am now, at this moment, this year in particular, not teaching what I call real students, real language students. I'm teaching teachers. But in my classes, the bonus strategy that tells me the most information is what we call exit sentences, right? Imagine that these are exit sentences that students can write on a piece of paper and give you as they leave the classroom, right? I generally give them an option to say what they can do, to say, in this case, is asking and answering questions, right? But also saying what they learned, right? And when you get them all together at the end of the lesson, right? Or when you stop the lesson 5 minutes before it finishes, you show them the sentences. I can ask, I can answer, today I learned. And you ask them, okay, tell me something. Tell me. And they can listen to everybody else saying what they've done. That is the most powerful takeaway that the students are going to get. Because you ask the students, what did you do in English class today? Nothing. What did you learn? Nothing. With these exit sentences, you are teaching them that they can also self-assess. That's another dimension of assessment, but it's important that we develop it, right? And here is, you will see it when you watch the webinar again, how to use the exit sentence. I'm giving you what it is, when to use it in the last 3 or 5 minutes, or maybe after you have done practice, right? But more importantly, why use it is to check, we know, because this is all about checking. How to use them, you have the instructions there. And remember, they are good way of helping us make decisions, right? And the simple message that I want you to get is, what you are doing is giving them a very short sentence to complete, but you will get a lot of information from it. Because when everybody in the class has said something or written something and given to you on a slip of paper, right? At the end of the class, you can say, oh yeah, look, most of them can do X, Y, or Z, okay? So in these last few minutes that we have for this webinar, let me make you an invitation, right? To consider that assessment for learning is not just about the techniques. Remember, we always said, we have been saying, is the follow-up. Is we check and then we do more. There's a lot of research on feedback, on giving students information about how they have done. And the research says that it's one of the most powerful things that teachers can do to help students learn, right? So, in my humble opinion, feedback is not just information, it's help. If we do it in this way, if it is short, if it is clear, if it is kind, because mistakes are okay, but the educational mindset says, oh, errors, mistakes, bad. No, no, no. When I hear a student of mine make a mistake, I jump for joy because it's telling me where that student is, right? And this fourth condition is that it has to be useful. So it has to change, help students change, right? Now, remember that I said when we give feedback, we tell the students what they have done well, first of all, right? We very seldom say it. We assume, oh, they did it well. So students really get motivation out of like, Soledad, today you said 5 incredible things. Mauricio, thank you for contributing that idea, right? That kind of thing, you see their eyes light up like, ooh, I can learn English, right? Now, but remember, when you give feedback, you say what they've done well, you say what they have had trouble with, but then you tell them how to solve that problem. Because if we don't tell them how to solve the problem, they won't learn. That is why, as a summary, I have short feedback plus another chance. Give them another chance, and that results in better learning. Okay? Here are some examples of feedback that is short and up to the point. A student says, what is he? The teacher observes and says, good try. Look, who is he? Try again. Who is he? Good, right? So we have the feedback, we have the model, and we have the try again. In this other piece of feedback, we have the student saying, how is he? And the teacher says, good try. Look, how old is he? Try again. So again, the question word that was our goal, remember? Clear feedback. The teacher is not saying, the student says, how is he? And the teacher doesn't say, how old is he? Without the student not noticing, right? And there is evidence that if you repeat correctly what the student said wrong, it has no effect, right? You have to be a little bit more explicit. Not a grammar explanation. Don't give an explanation. Just model, right? So when he says, how old is he? Again, the try again, you say, good, he's 23 years old, right? And then the final one, he firefighter, is a typical mistake. And the teacher models, he's a firefighter. He catches up, right? The student uses the model and they try again. So, my friends, we have seen a lot of things today, from planning to checking that students have learned. As you have been told, the webinar will be available for 1 more week. And I would like to invite you now to create an application task after the webinar. How does it work? I call it my 5-minute check, right? Start with your learning objective, the can-do statement, right? Then take an activity that you do in the classroom regularly, write the activity down, right? And create one check. ABCD cards or exit sentence, whatever you want. Then decide, students show me by. How will students show you that they have learned? If many students need help, what will you do? And then after you have gone through the process, ask the students for an exit sentence that will give you confirmation that you're serving or listening, gathering evidence, modeling again, trying again, and doing it allows them to complete the sentence in a different way. And also create your own feedback phrase, right? I like it when teachers have motivating ways of telling to the students. First, the positive, then what they still need to mend, to arrange, and put in the correct order or whatever, and then give them one piece of advice, right? This is an invitation to try it. And as you can see, it takes not more than 5 minutes. So in this webinar today, I want to thank you for joining, first of all, right? And these are some of the ideas. Small checks throughout the lesson make a big impact. Assessment for learning is no more test. What you need is small checks that help students learn. How do we do that? To summarize, we look at the learning outcome, the learning objective turned into what the students actually do. We gather evidence. We make a decision to continue, to stop, model, and try again. And then we do something to help them. Okay? So, my presenter script, the ideas that I want to hammer into your heads. Teachers, assessment for learning is not extra work. It is a way to see your students better, in a more clearer, right? When you check learning during the lesson, you can help the students before it is too late. Because if you don't do assessment for learning throughout the lessons, when the test comes, it's already too late. There are 2 American authors that have an amazing phrase, like, when you don't do assessment for learning as a regular thing, you are taking this attitude: teach, test, and pray for the best. Pray for a miracle, right? Unless one small check can change the next 5 minutes of your lesson. When you see that you have lost the students and you model it again, you get them to try again, you are giving them powerful tools to learn. And sometimes those mere 5 minutes make a big difference. So my final message: check, understand, respond, help every lesson and every student. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel, for such an insightful presentation. Please stay with us a little longer. We would also like to invite Leonor, who delighted us with great ideas, to join us for the question and answer session, which will be moderated by Dr. Paula Rebolledo, the project academic coordinator, whom we are also delighted to welcome.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this very brief session, Q&A session. I hope you enjoy both sessions so far. I'm here to lead this brief session, but before we begin, I would like to thank both Leonor and Gabriel for the very engaging and practical presentation. I truly enjoy it. I hope you did as well and you find it useful. You have given us a lot to think about and practical ideas to take to our teaching context. Again, in this session, I have very limited time. So due to time constraints, I won't be able to address all the questions that came up at, on the chat during the conversation. But I will like at least to ask one question to Leonor and one question to Gabriel based on their presentations and also on the questions that appeared on the chat box. So I'm going to begin with you, Leonor, okay?
Okay.
I was very interested in the spiral approach, and I think there is a lot to take from that approach. And there is something that some of the participants mentioned that could, there were some tensions that could emerge if the approach is used. So when you showed us that skills need to be revisited again and again throughout a lesson, and in a way, the complexity of those activities increase as the class develops and progresses. In contexts where you have many different levels, big classes, how can teachers decide when students are ready to move on from recognition to production or from supported to more independent performance? How they can determine when is the right time to move on, considering the different levels that they teach?
I think, thank you for your question, Paula. It's related to what Gabo was saying, these small checks. Yes, I mean, I didn't mention anything about assessment. Assessment should never come at the end, but all along. And again, we don't mean tests at all. So there have to be different checks. And the idea is that when we plan, we know that there are different levels in every class apart from different learning styles. So the idea is to think about how each student is making progress. So maybe for some students, they won't be able to reach production level because they are, let's say, behind from the rest through no fault of theirs. But the idea is that if we can work on learning objectives and we share with them, we can show them that they are making progress. At the beginning, they felt that they couldn't understand anything, and now they can understand. No production yet, but still there is progress. So that's why working with learning objectives and assessment for learning, I mean, they go hand in hand because each student can see, and we can see as teachers, what progress they are making. When we have different levels, it's impossible, even if we had 10 learners in one group, which is a miracle. It's impossible to think about the same learning objectives or for everybody to reach the learning objectives in the same way. So we know that they move from nothing to recognition and then to production. Some will reach production at their own pace. Some won't reach production, but they are making progress. So that is something we need to bear in mind all the time. And we can be helped to learn that through assessment for learning, through these small checks. Yes. And of course, sharing that with learners. If they say, for instance, a typical example, if they've learned present continuous and then they learn can, a typical example is, I can swimming. So instead of saying, no, that's wrong, think for ourselves. What does that student know? That he or she has to use pronouns. That can is used to express ability, and he's using an action which is related to abilities. He just or she does have to focus on this ing, which is not necessary, but that's the only thing they need to change. So focusing on assets, on what they can do instead of saying no, wrong, because if you say the whole thing is wrong, then where can they start from if everything is wrong? So saying, great, you start with I or he or she, that can is used to talk about it, to express ability. You're using a verb, you're not saying I can watch TV, meaning ability. So it's a question of just focusing on that little part. So
Then, from
yeah.
that point of view, Leonor, then it would be very, as you were saying, it's very important for us teachers to, when we define the learning objectives, be very clear what we can start with, and then how to organize those learning objectives and activities progressively, so that we try to move on at their own pace.
Right. Yes, absolutely. There are, simple in the sense that you don't require lots of things for, activities for fast finishers, early finishers, whatever you want to call them. So those who maybe are quicker or grasped everything more quickly, and mind you, fast doesn't make it any better. There's again this idea that I finished first, I finished, then what? The good point is finishing, not finishing first or second. So those who finish faster than others, they can focus on something else. Or what I teach my students, even in primary schools, with this context in which there are quite a number of students, not just 5 or 6, I teach them that they can stand and help around. And they know that helping is not giving an answer, but help students focus on clues in sentences, for instance. And once I model that, and they learn that, so they stand and they help those who are still, let's say, grappling with different contexts. And sometimes a help from a peer is much better and more effective than help from the teacher, because they are at the same level. So that's definitely how you can manage different levels, different rhythms, different paces in the classroom without dying in the process. Because it's true that we work long hours, we teach lots of groups, so we cannot prepare something special for each of the subgroups within one. It would be maddening, even if you had just one group, which is nobody's case. So it's a question again. It's a question, basically, the most important resource when they say time is money. So it's not spending your money on buying photocopies and things, but this is stop and think, reflect on what you can do to help your students learn.
Thank
Not
you,
easy,
Leonor. Thank you.
it's
I know. Thank you. Well, I very much appreciate your answer. And since it's so related to your topic, Gabo, this idea of how teachers are going to be able to adapt their teaching, considering that they have so many students, different classes, because if they are collecting and gathering all this evidence from these small checks, then there is a moment that they need to start creating these adaptations. How do you see that happening in big groups, connecting to what Leonor just told us?
I would say the guiding light should be the expected performance of the student at the end. And here we have to be very realistic. I always think, okay, I have a learning objective. What do I want my students to be able to say at the end of the lesson? And then I go, okay, let me think. Juan really gets nervous whenever he has to say something he says he doesn't understand. Then I have Maria, who is a good student, who makes a lot of mistakes, but she's very fluent. Then I have Pedrito, who goes to private English lessons and he tends to monopolize, right? So once I have that clear, I can say, okay, I'm going to listen for Juan when he says something, and I'm going to give a positive feedback to him. I'm going to ask Pedrito, who studies English privately, right? Or who studied English more than the rest of the class, sorry, to do something different. Like I may ask him to read something to the class. And that is how I would go around differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
I like to start every class with a routine, right? Which in my case has proved very efficient. We do a phase, not a warm-up. We do an exploration, right? Explore. And I start the lesson by inviting the students to, when they write the date and the weather report and all those mechanical things that are done, right? But which are important because many of our students only study from their notebook. So when they missed a date, right, they can ask their partners in the class for the notes from that day. And then I tell them and I use Spanish if my students are beginners, right? What we're going to learn today. Hoy vamos a aprender a hacer preguntas y respuestas sobre cosas personales. ¿Por qué? Vamos a imaginarnos, a ver, chicos, ¿qué se les ocurre? ¿Para qué sirven esas preguntas? And so you are putting the onus on them, right? After you do that, right, and you establish the purpose of this, you can say, and then we're going to be using this for dialogues, and you're going to be listening to these questions. Where do we use this in real life? How does this connect to real life? After that, I give them an agenda, right? So I tell them precisely how the class is going to evolve. And I've been criticized a lot for doing that. They say, oh, that is for babies. No, because I have students with attention deficit disorder who in the middle of the class, a fly passed by and they got lost and they don't know where they are. The agenda helps them ground themselves. I have students who are in the spectrum, in autism spectrum, and they need some certainty, but they also need a clear sense of progress. So the agenda, we move on from activity 1 to activity 2 to 3 to 4, that gives everybody some sort of security. And it is my most powerful assessment for learning tool. And I'm going to explain in a minute why. After that, I tell the students, okay, just think. And I can do it in Spanish if needed, right? A ver, chicos, ¿qué es lo que ustedes pueden, de qué información pueden preguntarle a un compañero ahora ya en inglés? Y by the end of the lesson, how many questions do you think you will be able to ask? Give yourselves a goal. Write it down in your notebook, right? 5 questions, 2 questions, 1 question. And then at the end of the lesson, 5 minutes before it finishes, I go back to the agenda. And what I do is I use the agenda to check. Like, for example, remember when we learn new vocabulary? Okay, who can give me 5 new words we learned today? I want to know, quiero saber qué relación familiar tiene Pedrito con el señor de la lección. Who can ask me the question, right? Who can answer the question, right? And then you tell them, and now go back to the first page in your notebook where you wrote down how many questions you thought you were going to be able to ask. Most of them are going to say 1, 2, and all of a sudden, after this process that Leonor has been describing, and with the support of Assessment for Learning, they can ask all the questions. So there's no better motivator than that. And then, yes, talk to the ones, because not everybody's going to get it, right? But talk to the ones who you know experience the most difficulties, and then do something for them. Suggest something they can listen to, they can read. Even if, now with artificial intelligence, we can create tailor-made revision and practice things with the student, for the students who most need it. So I think that is a way I would differentiate. I wouldn't go about doing different tasks for different students, because I don't believe in differentiation in that way. We are all good at something and we are all bad at something. So as the course progresses, we have strengths and weaknesses. So those weaknesses can be temporary, right? Don't just label somebody like they are in Uruguay, they call them English proof. They call them the rocks because nothing enters, right? And I always say the most beautiful stalactites are 1 drop of water that permeated through the rock, right? But believe that everybody can learn. Perhaps not everything all the time, but everybody can learn something new today.
Yeah, is this notion of having to calibrate the learning objectives according to the reality of our classroom, to the different students we have.
Exactly.
It is an art. It is almost like a science and an art and a craft at the same time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating one.
Yeah, I know.
Fascinating one.
It's a challenge, but nobody says teaching was easy.
No.
So I just wanted to thank you both for these wonderful presentations, for sharing your expertise, for the practical ideas that you shared with us. It was truly a pleasure. I enjoyed your balloons, Gabo. Those were a nice highlight.
I don't know where they came from.
Your hand gestures. Every time we do hand gestures on Apple, then these the balloons come up. But that was fun. Thank you very much, both of you, for your presentations. And thank you, everybody who joined us. I'm going to now hand back to Ale for the final words.
Thank you, Leonor, Gabriel, and Paula. It has been a privilege to have you with us. Before we finish, please accept our sincere thanks for your fantastic sessions and for the contribution to the professional development of English teachers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. And it has been a pleasure to work with so many colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you again. Well, many thanks also to all the teachers who joined us and took part in this webinar. Remember that the webinar will be available on demand for 1 week, which you can visit using the same link. And to obtain the proof of attendance, please register your participation in the survey. We are sharing the link in the chat and showing the QR code on the screen. You can follow the instructions at the end to download your proof of attendance. This survey will also be available for 1 week. And finally, please keep an eye on our news. We are having more activities planned for you. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.